It all started on a cold Monday morning when the financial markets opened in New York, and the news ticker began flashing an alert that no one in the automotive industry wanted to see. Falcon Motors stock plunges 32% in pre-market trading. For decades, Falcon Motors had been a name synonymous with innovation, luxury, and the power of American engineering. They had been the automaker that dared to dream big, creating cars that became cultural icons, vehicles that featured in blockbuster films, and machines that families trusted for generations. But behind the polished chrome grilles and glossy advertisements, a storm had been brewing, a storm so intense that it threatened to dismantle everything the company had built over nearly a century. James Walker, the CEO of Falcon Motors, stood in his glass-walled office on the 48th floor of the company's headquarters in Detroit, staring down at the streets below. His reflection looked tired, older than his 52 years, the weight of a trillion-dollar industry resting squarely on his shoulders. He had spent the entire weekend on back-to-back calls with the board, bankers, and lawyers, trying to stop what now seemed inevitable, a catastrophic collapse that could ripple across the global economy. "Sir," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Emily Carter, his chief of staff, holding a tablet with live updates. "The numbers, they're worse than we anticipated. We've lost another 14% since the opening bell." James turned sharply. "What about the rescue package? Did Goldman confirm the bridge loan?" Emily hesitated. "They pulled out this morning." James closed his eyes for a moment. Goldman Sachs had been their last hope for immediate liquidity. Without that bridge loan, Falcon Motors wouldn't even make payroll by Friday. As Emily left the room, James walked slowly to his desk, where the morning papers were spread out. The headlines were brutal: America's automotive giant on the brink, what went wrong at Falcon Motors? The end of an era? Each article seemed more damning than the last, painting a picture of arrogance, mismanagement, and hubris. But James knew the truth was far more complex, and far more sinister.
The trouble hadn't started overnight.
It had been years in the making, a slow decay masked by glossy annual reports and soaring marketing campaigns. While competitors like Tesla, Rivian, and even foreign giants like BYD were racing ahead in the electric vehicle revolution, Falcon Motors had dragged its feet. They had laughed off EVs as a passing fad, clinging to their gas-guzzling SUVs and muscle cars that once defined the American dream. But now, that dream had turned into a nightmare. In a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, 32-year-old Alex Grant was scrolling through his phone when the breaking news alert popped up: Falcon Motors facing imminent bankruptcy. Alex, a lifelong Falcon enthusiast who had grown up idolizing the company's legendary sports cars, felt a pang of disbelief. Just 2 years ago, he had bought their flagship model, the Falcon X7, pouring his life savings into a machine he thought would last forever. Now, it seemed, the brand itself might not survive the year. Back in Detroit, James wasn't just worried about bankruptcy. He was terrified of the secrets that could come out if Falcon went down. Secrets that could destroy not only his career but the lives of thousands. For years, Falcon had been quietly covering up a series of safety defects in their hybrid models. Defects that had caused dozens of accidents and even fatalities. They had paid millions to keep lawsuits out of court, burying the evidence deep inside confidential settlements. And now, as the company's financial walls crumbled, those skeletons threatened to burst out of the closet for the world to see. At that very moment, in a sleek glass tower in Manhattan, investigative journalist Rachel Miles was sipping her third cup of coffee, staring at a document that had just landed in her inbox. It was a leaked internal memo from Falcon Motors' legal department, outlining a strategy to hide critical safety data from regulators.
Rachel's Pulse Weekend.
If this memo was real, it could be the biggest story of her career, a story that might bring down one of America's most powerful corporations. She picked up the phone and dialed a source inside the company. "It's Rachel."
I got the document.
"We need to talk now." While Rachel prepared her exposé, James was in a war room meeting with his top executives.
The mood was grim.
Charts and graphs flashed on giant screens, showing a downward spiral that no amount of spin could hide.
"We need a miracle," muttered CFO David Klein, his voice barely above a whisper.
"A miracle won't save us," James replied coldly. "We need a plan.
Something bold.
Something no one expects." But deep down, James knew there was no plan that could undo years of denial and mismanagement. The world had moved on, embracing clean energy, autonomous driving, and digital mobility. Falcon Motors had stayed stuck in the past, and now the past was coming for revenge. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, the Justice Department announced an official investigation into Falcon Motors for fraud, corruption, and obstruction of justice. The news hit the markets like a thunderclap, sending shares into freefall. Employees flooded social media with fears about losing their jobs, dealerships panicked, and loyal customers began questioning if their warranties would even be honored.
For James, the nightmare had only just begun. James Walker barely slept that night.
The city lights of Detroit shimmered through his penthouse window as he sat in the dark, staring at the half-empty glass of bourbon on the table. His phone buzzed with messages, calls from board members demanding answers, texts from lawyers warning of subpoenas, emails from investors threatening lawsuits. Every notification felt like another nail in the coffin. He thought of his father, who had worked the assembly lines at Falcon Motors back when the company was the pride of America. His father used to say, "Son, Falcon cars don't just take you places. They are freedom on wheels." Now, that same brand was chained by billions in debt, drowning under the weight of its own arrogance. Meanwhile, Rachel Miles was typing furiously in her Manhattan apartment. Her story was coming together, a damning piece that would expose Falcon Motors for what it truly was, a corporate giant that had gambled with lives and lost. The memo she had obtained wasn't just a small leak, it was a floodgate of corruption. It detailed how Falcon executives ordered engineers to downplay safety issues in their new hybrid SUVs, even after multiple internal crash tests showed catastrophic battery failures. And then there was the kicker, an email thread where James himself had signed off on delaying a recall to protect quarterly earnings. Rachel knew this would shake Wall Street to its core. She reached for her phone and called her editor, Mark Benson. "Mark, it's bigger than we thought. If this goes live, Falcon won't survive the week." On the other side of the country, in a dimly lit garage in Austin, Texas, a young engineer named Ethan Brooks stared at his laptop, his heart pounding. Ethan had worked at Falcon Motors for 6 years before quitting in disgust over the company's unethical practices. Now, he was the anonymous source feeding Rachel the documents. He knew the risks. Falcon had a history of going after whistleblowers with everything they had: private investigators, legal threats, character assassination. But Ethan couldn't stay silent any longer, not after the crash that killed a family of 4 in Nevada, a crash caused by the same defective battery pack Falcon had sworn was safe. Back in Detroit, James met with his crisis management team in the executive conference room. The tension was suffocating. "We have 3 priorities," James said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. 1. Stabilize the stock. 2. Keep the DOJ out of our internal files. 3. Kill this story before it hits. "Sir," interjected Lisa Morgan, Falcon's head of PR, "the story is already moving. We have chatter that the Herald will run it by morning." James slammed his fist on the table, making everyone flinch. "Then stop it.
He don't care what it takes.
Call their lawyers, call their advertisers, make it go away." But it was too late. At 7:15 a.m., Rachel's exposé went live. The headline screamed across the internet, "Inside Falcon Motors, the lies, the cover UPS, the deadly defects." The article spread like wildfire, trending on Twitter within minutes, picked up by every major news outlet in the country. TV anchors dissected it on live broadcasts, pundits called for congressional hearings, and outraged customers flooded Falcon's social media pages with demands for accountability. The stock crashed harder than anyone predicted, down 48% by midday. Trading was halted twice to prevent a total meltdown. In dealerships across America, sales reps faced angry customers demanding refunds, while mechanics whispered about the chaos unfolding at the top. And then came the lawsuits. Within 24 hours, Falcon Motors was hit with class action suits from accident victims, shareholders, and consumer protection groups. State attorneys general announced coordinated investigations. The DOJ subpoenaed Falcon's internal emails and financial records. What had started as a financial crisis was now a full-blown legal and political catastrophe. James sat in his office, watching the live news coverage. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he loosened his tie. The company he had devoted his life to was unraveling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But then, something unexpected happened. As Rachel basked in the glory of her viral story, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A distorted male voice came through. "You think you know the truth, but you don't. Falcon Motors isn't the only player in this game.
If you want the real story, meet me tonight.
Alone. And leave your phone behind. The call ended abruptly, leaving Rachel stunned. Who was this mystery caller? Was it a crank? Or someone with information that could blow the lid off an even bigger scandal? That night, Rachel drove to an abandoned parking garage on the outskirts of the city, her heart pounding in her chest. The place was eerily silent, the air thick with tension.
A man in a black hoodie stepped out from the shadow.
"You're in over your head," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Falcon Motors is just a puppet. The real control lies with people you've never heard of."
Rachel narrowed her eyes. Who are you?
The man handed her a flash drive. "This will explain everything. But once you open it, there's no going back." And just like that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Rachel alone with the drive and 1,000 questions. Meanwhile, James Walker was preparing for the fight of his life. He had called an emergency board meeting, not to discuss survival, but to discuss war. "We have enemies on all sides," he said, his voice cold and deliberate. "The media, the government, these so-called whistleblowers. They want to destroy us. But we are Falcon Motors.
We don't go down without a fight."
But even as he spoke, James knew this wasn't just about corporate survival anymore. This was personal. And if the contents of that flash drive ever saw the light of day, it wouldn't just destroy Falcon Motors. It would expose secrets powerful enough to shake the foundations of the entire auto industry, and maybe even the government itself. Rachel drove back to her apartment in silence, the flash drive burning a hole in her pocket like a ticking time bomb. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every car in her rearview mirror looked suspicious, every shadow seemed alive. When she finally reached home, she locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat down at her desk. With trembling hands, she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. A single file appeared, Project Atlas, Confidential. She clicked it open, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a report. It was hundreds of documents, emails, internal memos, wire transfers, and most disturbingly, classified government contracts. The documents revealed that Falcon Motors had been part of a secret alliance with other major automakers and energy conglomerates to suppress clean energy breakthroughs for decades. They had poured billions into lobbying efforts, bribed officials, and even sabotaged startups that threatened their dominance. But that wasn't the shocking part. At the center of it all was a name Rachel didn't expect: James Walker. He wasn't just a CEO trying to save his company. He was one of the architects of this shadow network, codenamed Atlas. And the documents hinted at something even darker. Atlas wasn't just about controlling the auto industry. It was about controlling the future of energy itself, ensuring that fossil fuels remained indispensable at any cost. Rachel's hands shook as she scrolled through the files. If this was real, it wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was the story of the century. But the implications terrified her. This wasn't just about Falcon Motors going bankrupt. This was about a global conspiracy involving corporations, politicians, and possibly even intelligence agencies. Exposing this could make her a target for people who would kill to keep these secrets buried. Meanwhile, in Detroit, James was on a secure video call with the remaining board members. Their faces were pale, drawn tight with fear. "The DOJ isn't our biggest problem," James said, his voice low and cold. "Our biggest problem is that someone inside leaked the Atlas files." The boardroom fell silent.
No one dared to speak.
Finally, David Klein, the CFO, asked, "How much do they have?" James clenched his jaw.
Enough to destroy US all.
Across the country, Ethan Brooks sat in his tiny apartment, staring at his phone. He had heard nothing from Rachel since their last encrypted chat. He felt a knot of dread in his stomach. Did she get the files? Was she safe? He knew what Falcon was capable of. He had seen it firsthand. When another engineer, Sarah, had threatened to go public last year, she had mysteriously vanished. The company claimed she resigned and moved overseas, but Ethan never believed it. Now, he feared Rachel might be next. At Falcon Motors headquarters, security was on high alert. James had hired a private intelligence firm to track down the leak. Their operatives were ex-military, experts in surveillance and cyber warfare. They had already traced suspicious activity to Ethan, but what they didn't know was that Ethan wasn't working alone anymore. Rachel had backups of the files, hidden in multiple encrypted servers. If anything happened to her, the information would still get out. As night fell, James met with a man named Victor Hale, a fixer with a reputation for making problems disappear. They met in an underground parking lot, away from prying eyes. "You need this handled quietly," Victor said, his voice calm, his eyes cold.
Nos noises, nos louzaines.
James nodded. "She can't publish. If she does, Atlas burns, and we all burn with it." Victor smiled faintly. "Consider it done." But Rachel wasn't as easy a target as they thought. She had already sensed danger and taken precautions. Before leaving the garage where she met the mystery man, she had slipped the flash drive into a secure Dropbox that automatically uploaded its contents to a dead man switch server. If anything happened to her, the files would automatically release to every major news outlet in the world. She knew she was playing a deadly game, but she also knew there was no turning back. The next morning, chaos erupted. Rachel's exposé on Falcon Motors was already devastating, but now whispers of a bigger story began circulating online. Anonymous posts on dark web forums hinted at Project Atlas, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories. Hashtags like #AtlasLeak and #FalconGate started trending. Protesters gathered outside Falcon dealerships, holding signs that read "Stop the Lies" and "Justice for Victims." Lawmakers called for immediate hearings, and the president himself issued a statement promising a full investigation. James watched it all unfold from his office, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with fury. For the first time in his career, he felt something he had never felt before: fear. Real fear. Because this wasn't just about losing his job or even going to prison. If Atlas was exposed, powerful people far above him, would come crashing down. And they would make sure James didn't live to see that happen. As the day wore on, James received a call from an unlisted number. He answered, and a deep, menacing voice said, "You promised control, James. You promised this would never see daylight. Now it's out there, and if you can't fix it, you're finished." The line went dead before James could respond. His hands were trembling as he put down the phone. Whoever that was, they weren't from Falcon. They were higher. Much higher. That night, Rachel sat in her apartment, staring at the glow of her laptop screen. She was drafting the follow-up story, the one that would name names and blow Atlas wide open. But then she heard a noise, a faint creak on the floor behind her. Her blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned her head. Standing in the doorway was a man dressed in black, his face hidden behind a mask. Rachel's scream never made it past her lips.